Hey guys, back with Unit 3, Video 9. We're going to talk about social institutions. So at this point, I know you're very familiar with the dumb drawing that I do, but we will have actually completed the entire sort of model of a society. We'll have the symbolic universe, we'll have the collective consciousness, which together add up to culture, which largely influence your thoughts. We did the interaction order in the last set, which is contributing to your behavior in informal situations. And for this one and the next two after this, we'll be talking about social institutions or the formal situations that influence your behaviors. So after that, it will be all the consequences of the machine, but we will have completely built our model of society. It's not an exaggeration to say that getting this model is the crucial insight of my entire course. If you can explain to your friend or your parent that society is a machine, that it takes in raw materials of people and produces thoughts and behaviors, and we see that in our day-to-day lives. We see people thinking similar thoughts, understanding reality in the same way, and behaving in completely predictable ways. This is not just theoretical. You wake up tomorrow, look around, and what you will see is a whole bunch of people behaving in patterned ways and thinking in patterned thoughts. If you can explain to your family what the symbolic universe is and what it contributes, what the collective consciousness is, what it contributes, what the interaction order is and what it contributes, and what social institutions are and what they contribute, first of all, it will be an amazingly annoying conversation. But second of all, that is a major accomplishment. You will understand at least the framework of understanding what is the context within which you're living your life. To get to the specifics, we have to deal with American society. I've used a lot of American examples, but this applies to anything. Okay, social institutions. I've got 3 points for this lecture. First of all, the definition of social institutions. Second of all, how they are created. And third of all, the crucial point that a social institution in sociology is not synonymous with organization. It's a nitpicking point, but it's important for my course, for your exam. But also, the two concepts, being able to keep them separate is actually a useful thing to be able to do. All right. First of all, the definition of a social institution. Social institutions are patterned ways of meeting needs. Patterned ways of meeting needs. That could be a little bit more legible. All right, so that's the definition, but I want to draw you back to one of our first couple of lectures. Remember that the entire reason that we build this machine, the entire reason is to be able to securely and efficiently meet our needs. It's not about individual happiness, it's about meeting the needs of the group. Now, what we have gotten to in this fourth quadrant of our machine is where that stuff actually happens. It would be, I think, an exaggeration to say that this is the most important quadrant, but this is sort of the business end of the quadrant, of the machine. Okay, patterned ways of meeting needs. The way you and I experience it is as formal situations, at work, in school, at church. That is our experience of this part of society. All right, so that's point one. They are patterned ways of meeting needs. And really, I want you to focus on the idea of, let's see if red shows up for you. The idea of ways. This is going to be just a crucial thing to think about, to remind yourself of in social institutions, because they are not the same as organizations. A social institution is a way of meeting a need. It is a set of behaviors, and that's going to be important for us. Okay, point two, how they are created. It's going to be easier to think about this if we go back to our ancestors who were hunter-gatherers. A social institution, how it gets created, remember they are trying to meet needs, and so somebody discovers a certain way that's going to be useful for doing that. Maybe it is a certain animal that if you hunt it at a certain time of day, you're more likely to be successful. And then that knowledge gets passed around. So somebody discovering a good way of meeting a need is the first step. Then that way, let's say it's hunting deer, but only in the evenings. Let's say that that's the way. That then becomes a norm. It evolves into a norm. At first it's one person. That person tells some other people, hey, this seems to work. They have success with it. And pretty soon in their group, that is the way it gets done. And if you then go off and say, you know what, instead of doing that, I'm going to go hunt lion in the middle of the day because they're sleepy, that's frowned upon because A, you're dead, and B, it's not the way we do things. The way we do things is the norm of hunting deer at night or in the evening. Okay, so starts out with the person figuring out a good way of meeting a need. That's step one. Step two is that those ways, those behaviors evolve into norms. They evolve just by interaction. People come to expect that this is how you will do it, and there are consequences if you don't, because it's an expected behavior. Third is that the third step in this, how a social institution is created, is that if there are a lot of norms necessary, they get assigned to specific statuses, or what we would say is a division of labor gets established. So this is a little bit harder to see with my hunter-gatherer example, so I'm going to strain the example a little bit. But let's say that what happens is that deer are fast, so there are a certain group of people whose role in the hunt is to sneak around deer and ambush them. So they're like the ambushers. And then they drive the deer toward the people who have the bows and arrows or whatever to actually hunt the deer. And they go and shoot the deer. And then if they don't kill the deer, maybe there are chasers, and the chasers will go then run down the deer, because remember, the ambushers, they're tired now. So you've got, in that case, one way of doing things that has enough norms that they have to be divided up, a division of labor. Each of those gets assigned to a particular status. So at first it might have been Jerry was the ambusher and Leon was the shooter and whatever. But then it becomes there's just a status of ambusher and a status. And so when Jerry can't do it because he sprained his ankle chasing a deer through the woods, then they get whoever else to do it. So that's how they're created. 3 steps. First, somebody figures out a good way of meeting a need. Second, those ways become codified into norms. They evolve into expectations. And third is, if there are enough norms necessary, they get divided up among different statuses. Okay, so we've got the definition. It's a patterned way of meeting needs. We see how they are created. Now, point 3, and this is a big point, social institutions are not organizations. Organizations are groupings of statuses. So if you think about your education right now, your education involves you stepping into the status of student, me stepping into the status of teacher, but somebody else stepping into the status of information technologist who's able to connect us via this. Somebody else is in charge of the power plant at the university. So all these different statuses. Now, here's the thing. Those statuses are grouped together in our university, but there's another grouping of those statuses at Harvard University, and another one at Stanford, and another one at the University of Minnesota, and another one at all these different places. So the social institution of educating you is a patterned way of meeting that need, but that pattern exists at this university, at other universities, as groupings of those statuses. They take a whole bunch of teachers, power plant workers, information technologists, students, department heads, all that stuff, and group them together. And basically that's done for efficiency's sake. So Organizations not the same as institutions. Institutions are the ways that it gets met. Organizations are the groupings of statuses. Within social institutions, most of them have sort of typical organizations. We just talked about schools with the social institution of education. The social institution of the economy has a sort of characteristic organization. It's called a corporation. Religions have sort of characteristic organizations called churches. Not all of them are quite that simple. The social institution, and I'll list off these social institutions in another lecture where I kind of am more specific about them. But government is a social institution that meets the need of order within a society. But in government, there are several different kinds of organizations. You've got political parties. You've got legislatures. Those don't do the same thing. You've got courts. You've got government agencies. So all these are sort of different types of organizations, whereas in the economy, you basically have one, corporations. Within education, you mostly have one, although I teach an entire course in social institutions, in which case I would talk to you about how actually within education, you do have some other things, but you get the point. All right, and then that might have been the last thing that I wanted to say. Organizations are not the same as institutions. Next time what we're going to do is talk about the sort of major change that happens in human society in about 1500. We talked about it when we talked about human beings bending the laws of ecology. Now what we're going to do is talk about how those changes that happen around 1500, two of them in particular, how they influence basically all the social institutions that we see, at least in the Western world. So it will be social institutions in the modern world. We'll talk about that next time.